the Evolution Security Podcast. Well, everybody, welcome to the Evolution Security Podcast. We are excited to be back on here for a great show and a great guest. You know, Eric, I have to say, our guest here is someone that we often quote, often reference, and point people to his blog. And I think every time we mention him, we say, man, we've got to get him on the show.
Yep.
Well, we finally did, and we are honored to have Claude Werner on, who is also very well known as the Tactical Professor. It's an honor to have you on, Claude. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing tonight?
Living the dream. Born to be alive.
Nice.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of information on you so we can jump in here and start talking about some fun topics that you have a lot of knowledge on. But I just want to mention the breadth of your experience, which is one thing. You were an intelligence officer. You were the mechanized infantry company commander.
Mm-hmm.
You were a special forces A-team commander. And to us shooters, you were chief instructor of the amazing Rogers Shooting School. And I'll tell you one more thing that kind of piques my interest, being an accountant for a day job, is the fact that you were the national director of real estate research for one of the big four accounting firms in the world, Deloitte and Touche. Now that one kind of floored me. That's a lot of different experiences there or jobs. And that's just to name a few. So we're excited to pick your brain tonight, Claude.
Glad to be here.
Well, Claude, I think we kind of talked a little bit off the recording here, and I was personally in the support side when I was a soldier. I've been out for about 16 years, but I currently work still as a civilian, and my wife and I love this Fort Bragg area. So I know that you had a little time out here. But, some of my best friends in this area are all 18 series guys. I'm one of the coaches at my jiu-jitsu gym in the mornings, and half the guys that show up are all in one of your old MOSs. So I've got a soft spot in my heart for a lot of those guys. So good deal. So with that said, Claude, one of the things that you, I believe, have pioneered, and let's just put it this way, in a better thought process towards the things that can possibly go wrong as not only just a firearms owner, but also specifically somebody that carries for self-protection. And you've coined a word, excuse me, goodness gracious, coined a phrase, negative outcomes. And I think it's a brilliant way of placing a mental cue on how important it is that, hey, we got to think more nuanced when it comes to carrying a firearm and how we do everything around carrying any type of weapon. But can you espouse what negative outcomes are and give our audience some examples, if you don't mind? Espouse as much as you want.
The concept originally came from my colleague Craig Douglas at the tactical conference, I think probably 10 years ago. And he came up to me at the end of the conference and he said, you should do a presentation on what he called at the time bad shootings. Because I think that things had not gone quite as well as for the students as he would have liked in his interactive scenario class that he was teaching. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And Craig knows that I'm not afraid to ruffle feathers and delve into things. So I started researching it, and very quickly I realized it was more than just bad shootings, although that is a part of it. But the the depth of them went a lot deeper than that. So I just started cataloging things, which is kind of my training in the research and intelligence side of breaking things down. And so I had things like what we might consider just bad shootings, shouldn't have shot the person. But then it was things like, well, maybe you shouldn't shoot yourself, which happens more often than people realize.
It
Or
counts too, huh?
yeah, yeah, that's a bad shooting as well, but probably different than what Craig had originally thought. And the list kind of expanded to things that went beyond what the training community, tends to think of as necessary or not necessary. So, for instance, one of the things that I found out was in my study, at least, and I would say it's pretty comprehensive. I have about it's pushing 6,000 private citizen shooting incidents, or I should say defensive gun uses, because not all of them involve shooting, but the majority of them do. So I have a pretty in-depth database to back this up with, and it's really the decision making rather than the marksmanship that is the thing that gets people into trouble. They let their emotions get carried away with them, um, or we could take it in another area of, let's say, allowing what I call unauthorized access, when people allow other people who shouldn't have access to guns, children being the primary one, but not necessarily all the time. Sometimes you have crazy relatives or just goofy ones.
Yep.
And when they get access to guns, it's a problem, and kids, now, to be fair, kids shoot themselves pretty, and their friends, occasionally, unfortunately, sometimes their parents, um, about once a day. Let's on a basis. Let's say that is still less than the number of children who drown in pools. So it's not a huge problem until it happens to you, and then it's a life changing problem. Someone whose child accesses their gun and shoots themselves or shoots another kid or shoots their parent, that person will never be the same again, for understandable reasons. So those were the kind of things that I thought of as negative outcomes. And I have a list of 13 of them. Chasing and shooting is another one. Not understanding, and by chasing and shooting, I mean people have to understand that we are not law enforcement officers. And once the criminal breaks contact, it's time to just let them go.
Yep.
And I had a very interesting experience years ago. I was in a force on force training exercise for about 10 years. And one of the things that we noticed after a while was that even after the role player who was playing, not necessarily a robber, but a panhandler or something like that, even after that role player would try to break contact with the person would remain attached to him and follow them. And then we'd say, "Why did you follow Eric?" And the person who was attending the class, they'd say, "Well, I didn't do that." "Okay, here's the video, because we
Yeah.
recorded all of them." And they'd go, "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it." And so and I'm not a psychologist, probably the late William April could comment better on it than me, to say, what's this weird little bonding that takes place between an attacker and a defender? And I don't understand it. I just acknowledge that it's there. So that's another one of the um, negative outcomes, which unfortunately legally can be a big problem.
Oh
You
yeah.
chase somebody out of your store or out of your home, or shoot at them as they're leaving, and your bullets hit somebody else's property. Well, that's an issue. I can specifically point to one incident in my book where a man had to spend a couple of years in prison in Wisconsin because two guys assaulted him in his house, and he did everything right up until the point they left. And then they chased him out the door and started shooting him as they were shooting at them as they were running down the road. And his bullets hit someone's car and another building. And the police didn't take very kindly to that. And the judge sent him to prison for a couple of years for it. So really what I was trying to do was make people understand that just like any other major device, if you want to call it that, a car, you know, negative outcomes with cars. How many people get injured in car wrecks every year? And so we, think about that. Well, maybe I should put my seatbelt on, things like that. And guns are the same way, and any weapon, that there are parameters that we can use them in and parameters we can't, and things that we have to think about for them in using them responsibly. So that's what negative outcomes was all about.
Well, Claude, if I can just say, I guess there is a part of me that I do remember Craig mentioning that phrase at one point. And so I'm surprised that I hadn't spoke with him much further about that. Of course, Aaron can attest. We're dear friends with Craig. We've hosted him multiple times for his courses, and so yeah, I'm surprised I did not recall that. But I also can understand where I what is it at TACCON, he calls it his experiential lab or something of that sort, or
Yep.
a really
Right,
salient way.
experiential learning lab.
There we go. Yeah, I could see that particular lab facilitating that discussion between you two. That's kind of cool. Yeah, and another point I was going to make, Claude, is that I definitely read your blog a lot, and I definitely owe you a solid. I need to pick that book up, so I'm going to do that. Pretty much right after we get done with this, because I mean, of course, I've been reading a lot of the negative outcomes on your blog, and also what is it you call it, the good, the bad, the ugly, is kind of like a take on that, correct, or similar?
Correct.
Okay.
I had that idea late last year that I wanted to do it on my Patreon page, and just balance the three of sometimes people defend themselves very well and they handle everything right, and the outcome is as positive as can be for a criminal encounter. And so those are the good ones. And then in some cases, people just do all the wrong things and it turns out bad. Or, one of the ones that I managed to get pretty regularly is people shooting themselves. Well, I consider that bad.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, fortunately, not that quite as often as the other two, but there are incidents that occur that just have ugly aspects to them. Frankly, not always on the part of the person who's involved in the incident, but what people comment about later. Um,
Mm.
and one of the big things that really annoys me and saddens me is when someone shoots an attacker and the attacker doesn't die but is taken into custody by the police. And people will say, should have had better aim,
Aw.
meaning to kill them. Or in some cases, they'll just say flat out, too bad he didn't kill him. Then it would have saved the taxpayers the cost of the trial and imprisoning the dude. And those are very annoying to me because
Yep. Oh yeah.
People who say that sort of thing don't understand the cost of killing. And that's why I wrote that blog post about the cost of killing, because no one kills someone else in American society without repercussions to their own psyche. That's just
Oh
the
yeah.
way it is. Unless a person is a psychopath or a sociopath, which fortunately, that percentage of people who own guns is very, or among people who own guns, very, very small. Most gun owners are good people, just want to protect themselves and protect their families. And they're not interested in killing anyone. They're just interested in making sure that they don't get killed or their family members don't get killed or seriously injured or whatever. And so for someone to, and especially Yahoo is the worst, where people just get on there and they'll say that very regularly, too bad he didn't kill him. And to me, that's ugly. Those are people who don't understand that that's just not the right way to think about that. If you have to kill someone to live, then, you do what you got to do. But if you can stop the action, even without firing a shot, so much the better. And so those are
Absolutely.
the ugly ones. And so, those I wanted to have a column that, or a blog post monthly, that contrasted those three things. What what happened that was good? Okay, this is something we can look at and say good, and maybe even learn a lesson from. And something that's bad, well, we can learn lessons from that too, at someone else's expense. If they shoot themselves or whatever. And ugly, maybe we should adjust our thinking about that if it's anything that's entered our mind.
Well, and Claude, and I'll add to that too. I mean, you brought up the late great William April. He spoke all the time on how important it was to read news articles and actually visualize you being in that situation, and especially if
Hmm.
a poor decision was made, making a better decision, and again, developing that mental map, and especially if it was a good outcome, that's another good mental map. So I'm sure that you agree with that as well.
Oh, absolutely. William and I talked very regularly about the subject, and I miss the man so much. He
We all do,
contributed. He
yeah.
he was really one of a kind. For the rest of us, there are a lot of good trainers around who
Mhm.
focus on either tactics or the mechanics of shooting or whatever. But there was just no one like William who focused on the mental side of it, especially the mental side of the person who was the defender. And his passing was a tremendous loss to the community.
Very, very impactful. I mean, and it happened pretty fast. I
Yeah.
know I know when Craig and all the collective guys, Cecil, all the guys went down to see Paul Sharp, Larry Lindeman. They all went down to see him. And what was a little bit surprising, of course, William, he wasn't letting it out in the open, and we
Hmm.
saw them get together. And man, it was like a week later or 2 weeks
Yeah.
later, and man, it hit everybody like, man, what the heck happened? Yeah, his contribution to the community. Luckily, his work is still there for us to learn from and for future individuals to
Hmm.
learn from. But yeah, he'll never be replaced.
Nope.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of taking that amazing class, the Establishing Dominance Paradigm class with Tom Givens, Craig Douglas, and Dr. April. And my favorite, my favorite part of the class was Dr. William April's lectures. I mean, it was just so enjoyable. And I do have to say, Eric, do you recall this? This was an interesting aspect. Before he passed on, it was interesting. We had him on the show a few times, but he actually reached out to us and wanted to come chat with us again. and we kind of feel like afterwards we thought, you know what, he might have been trying to get a little bit more info out there because he knew it was impending. And that made us even the more kind of sad about it. But yeah, a gem of a person. And when Tom Givens was yelling at me, William would be encouraging me on the side. So thank God for William in that class.
William had a great saying that he said to me one time. He goes, "Be kind to yourself and be your own best friend." And I keep that in mind regularly. And that's something that goes along with when a person does have to defend themselves and it all comes out right, they have to keep that in their own mind that they did the right thing. Whatever the outcome was, they did what they had to do, even if it was distasteful. Because sometimes people really take it to heart that they have hurt people, someone else. Even if the person needed to be hurt, it hurts them to hurt someone else. And to people like that, I would, repeat William's saying, be kind to yourself and forgive yourself for what you had to do.
Man, that's well put. I don't think, well, because you were close to him, I would say we were acquaintances. I had not heard of him saying that. That's awesome. And definitely a good finer point on what he contributed for certain. And now, honestly, it's hard to move on from William, to be honest. Um, as far as decision making, right? I feel like there's starting to be a little bit of a trend in the firearms community. We know we have the application of firearms training, teaching folks the fundamentals, learn to draw from a holster, putting shots on target accurately with some speed, so on and so forth. And then we have classes like Craig's, ECQC. We got Cecil's, Cliff Byerly's, where the simunitions come into play, where that also has decision making. But also, Aaron and I have talked for some time about trying to bridge more of that gap, either through in which, our Force on Force class is, we intend for it to be a lighter version, right? Not that we're here talking about our class, but the point that I'm making is your social space gunfighting class, from my understanding and reading the description, it's that area that's not necessarily in between, but that complements courses on decision making, but also adds another layer of decision making. Am I right on that? Can you talk about that class? Tell us what that's about. And frankly, I'm
Well,
just going
what
to
I
tell you about
wanted
it.
to do with what I wanted to do with the class was build a class around, if you will, a series of median self-defense or personal protection incidents, and have the scenarios drive the class and have the drills support the scenarios rather than just having drills of mechanics. And frankly, the mechanics involved in my class are not really that difficult. I mean, I would run it up and down of what the standards were. In some cases they had to hit a 4-inch circle, and in other cases all they had to do was hit an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. But one of the things that I put in was, and my colleague Brian Hill put this very well, and I never really thought about it, that every round you fire is a decision. And he means it in the sense of, not only am I justified in firing it, but do I have an adequate sight picture or index on the target at very close range? And can I press the trigger adequately where the round will hit where it's supposed to and not go flying off into space? So that was part of it, and I posed that to the class exactly that way, that every round you fire is a decision. But then I came up with a little decision drill that was a simplified version of a set of targets that I had designed for action targets. I don't know, at least 10 years ago, where the whole class would, or the relay of the class would be online, but I designed the target so that not everyone got a shoot command each time. Sometimes they would just not get a shoot command, and get used to the idea that just because there's a stimulus doesn't mean that's time for you to fire your gun. And everyone really liked that. They said it was very
Awesome.
challenging. And in the police context, you think about it as a way of avoiding bunch firing, which is the way I originally designed the drill, because I was doing more training for the police back then. But even among private citizens, you might have to say, well, this situation is slightly threatening, but as the LAPD puts it, and I learn a lot from the LAPD. I think they have a fine training program, and I derive what I can for private citizens from them. And their thing about when to draw a gun is, has the situation arisen to the point where there is a likelihood of having to escalate it to deadly force? And if that's not the case, then LAPD officers are not supposed to draw their guns at all or exhibit a gun. And I think that's not a bad rule for us to observe as private citizens as well,
Oh yeah.
because if you pull a gun out and you're not justified in doing it, well, to a police officer, that's probably not that big of a deal, or at most they have to write a report about why they did that. For us, it's aggravated assault. It's
Yep.
a felony. So, what I wanted to do with that little drill, and it's a short one, it's about 24 rounds, but I wanted people get used to the idea of thinking with a gun in their hand, or thinking about when to put the gun in their hand. So
Mm.
that was the most structured version of the decision making process in the class. But then in the scenarios, they had to make decisions about when to move, where to move. um, they were all set up because they were all shooting incidents that I drew from the armed citizen column of the NRA publications, and I use that. I have been using that for almost 20 years now, as a basis of, this is what reality is. And I find that very useful to impart that to people, that this is what situations actually look like. And that's why I wanted to have that class driven by the scenarios and not by the technical aspects of shooting.
Well, Claude, I think I sent to you in one of the messages that I was bummed because if it wasn't for the fact that it was my anniversary, I would have been there. And now that you described it even more thoroughly, man, I'm bummed. But I think I told you, and Aaron remembers this. We hosted Craig one year for ECQC, and we couldn't find a proper date. And my wife is the one suggested, well, just do it on our anniversary if that works for Craig. And I'm like, babe, are you sure? And she's like, yeah, I don't mind. And and you may recall at the hot wash, Aaron, when Craig didn't even know it was my anniversary. He's like, oh my gosh. But my wife was a good sport about it. I made it up to her. And the next weekend we had a big date. So, but yeah, I would have been there,
Hey,
Claude.
I have one thing to say about that. Hold on to that woman.
I'm doing my best. Yeah, she's awesome and completely supportive of everything that I do in this path, for certain. So it wasn't like at the very beginning when we were newly married before the Army, she didn't understand a lot of it. But yeah, that's pretty nice. It didn't mean to get off on that tangent, but I thought I'd mention that. Still, do you have any ideas when you might do it again, Claude?
Well, this is what I thought of this as a prototype class, meaning it's been cooking in my mind and building up literally for 25 years. I used to run when I was a match director in the early days of IDPA, and twice a year I would have matches that I called the Armed Citizen match, where all the stages were drawn from armed citizen incidents. And
Mm.
anyone could come and you could bring any gun and you didn't have to have a holster. And I used to have ladies show up with Ruger Standard Autos and they would just do a table start instead of drawing from a holster. And the only rule exception to the IDPA rules that I had at the time was that if it was a 22, it was either -0 or -5. Yeah,
Mm.
and and that match, those matches, everybody told me they really liked how they went and people learned a lot from them. So this idea has been cooking ever since then, 1999. So I wanted to test it out and first of all see how it went because I like to have a class in which the administration of it by me works for me and the students. And then I wanted to see, well, what do people think of it? And so it's on both ends. I would have to say this worked out really well. It was kind of low round count, only 200 rounds. And so probably next year, I'll be taking that on the road as I can find sponsors for it. So I hope to be able to take that 4 to 6 times a year away from the Atlanta area. So we'll see what happens, and I'll let you know.
Well, and Aaron, also we keep talking about our birthday weekend together. I was originally doing some classes out at the range that I belong to. That's just 15 minutes from me, and then the board came out and said, "Nah, we're not going to do classes here." And then I got a text from the main range officer saying, "Hey, are you still doing classes?" I said, "Well, you told me we couldn't do them," and he's like, "Nah, that's been worked out. So I'm going to start doing classes there again." And maybe I can just have you out here,
I'd
if
like
you're
that.
willing to come out. So we can talk on that for
A-
certain.
Another excuse
Okay.
for me to drive 1,200 miles to hang out with you, Eric.
Yeah. Yeah, but damn good excuse.
Two weeks ago, Claude, I drove 32 hours to go hang out with my twin brother on our birthday.
Wow.
That was maybe a little too much. That was a little too much of a drive. The first time, 16 hours straight. I split it up
Wow.
the rest of the time. But no,
Yeah.
it truthfully, yeah, a good excuse to go see Eric would be to go to that class. And Eric, likewise, there of course is the Great Meade Hall range here, about
Hmm.
2 hours from me here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we maybe you could teach it there too, Eric, and then you would have to come here.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, cool, Claude. Just to add a finer point to that, we're extremely enamored by those classes becoming more and more by folks out there that are our mentors. So it sounds like it's an excellent class, and I think there needs to be a lot more type of classes like that because like you said, negative outcomes, people making poor decisions. We see it all the time in in simulations where people make
Hmm.
really bad decisions. And I won't go deeply into one that Aaron and I observed in one of the ECQCs was a person that had a lot of training, and a person was uh, emulating that they were hitting on him, and this person thought that the guy had a weapon. I mean, in his brain, he thought he had a. He pulls a weapon, and it ended up being he plugged him right in the chest, and I think ultimately that's the kind of stuff with a well-trained person that sometimes that amount of pressure, maybe not being under that before, caused that poor decision.
Yeah,
Hmm.
So
he just had a guy trying to take him on a date,
yeah.
and he put him in the ground. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a crazy. We were all going, "What the heck?"
Yeah, and I
Well,
forget what.
I had a similar experience when I was doing Force on Force as a role player, that I was playing a drunken bum laying on the ground when somebody came out of their office building, and I can do a drunk pretty well. Hey, you want to try out this Bud Light? Really good. And the person just shot me. And so David Blinder, who ran the whole thing, stopped it
I
right
know
away, and he
David.
said, "Yeah." And so David stopped it, and he said, "Why did you shoot him?" And the guy goes, "Well, it was Claude. He had to be up to something." Well, well, no.
he he had a
I was.
predisposition against you, Claude.
That's
his
right.
mis-
That's
his mistake in the
which.
class. I was
Yeah,
just saying his mistake in the
and
class was think as considering you as you instead of the role playing.
exactly. But then, that could happen to somebody who, like you say, is placed under a certain amount of pressure in real life, and they don't think about the consequences of, what might happen, that this person is not necessarily a real dangerous, but it's just different. It's just different. And there's in going back to negative outcomes, there was an incident that I described in the book about a lady who was loading groceries into the back of her car in a Walmart parking lot. And a man came up to her, and the cameras clearly showed that he was never got closer than 10 feet to her, and asked her for a light for his cigarette. And she pulls her revolver out of her purse and threatens him with it. And then, as he runs into the Walmart to get away from her, she's tracking him with her revolver and muzzles two people in another car, a woman and her child, as he goes into the Walmart. Well, he went into the Walmart, called the police. The police came and charged her with aggravated assault. And I don't have the outcome of the case, but clearly she was in the wrong there. And she said, "I've never been so scared in my life, because somebody came up and um, asked her a question while she was what Craig describes as a state of task fixation. She was
Mhm.
loading her groceries and just had no idea of what was going on around her, and then reacted badly to that. Well, sorry, but I hope that she didn't have to do any time over that, but there was that possibility, and she's clearly going to lose her gun permit over it.
Oh yeah.
So, that was a bad situation.
Sounds like her amygdala took over, didn't it?
Exactly.
Well,
Well,
what you got, Aaron?
so as we were just talking a little bit about me coming to spend some time with Eric, so a couple of weeks ago we spent our birthday together, and there's absolutely no way that he and I can get together without a significant amount of training, because we go to a lot of classes together and we've taught classes together, but we rarely just get to chill out and do some training together, just the two of
hmm
us. So we had a few things planned, and one of the we were shooting pistols one day, and then carbine the next day. So on the carbine day, Eric set us up to take the Ohio police carbine qualification. And we
hmm
talked about this multiple episodes ago, and Eric learned about it through your blog. Well, so we ran through that this weekend. I mean, that weekend, and I'll tell you, it just was an incredible set of standards to work on and meet that covered almost everything you would need to with the carbine as even as a civilian in my mind. But it was a blast. But what we would like to know is, why do you believe that that's an important standard qualification to work on?
I think that there are a lot of standards like that, especially with carbines, with the M4, the AR pattern rifle, that a lot of people don't know how to practice with them. And when I started looking at um, a lot of police qualification courses, which, as Greg Ellifritz says, they're not really that difficult. But if all you've ever done is shoot off of a bench, then they are. And
Mm,
yet they provide you with some feeling of, well, these are the kind of mechanical standards that and tasks that you're going to have to accomplish to use that rifle effectively. And that's why I wrote that book, um, Shooting Your Black Rifle, because it was just a collection of drills. Because I hate it when I see people go to the range and they really have no plan and they just pop off a bunch of rounds and they think they're doing okay. And in fact, really, they're just turning money into noise, as the saying goes.
Yeah.
And if they had just a little bit of a plan, which those police quals, especially for the carbine programs, um, it gives them something to do, and then they know much better what they're doing and what they're capable of doing. I think sometimes one of the biggest values to me of running a person through a qualification course is just letting them know, well, maybe you're not quite as good as you thought you were, or in some cases, maybe you're better than you thought you were.
Yeah.
And so for all of us, knowing where we are is an important part of our development as shooters and practitioners, if you will. And actually, truthfully, that doesn't matter whether it's we're talking about guns or cars. I notice you both have musical instruments in the background. So those are all things that, it's good to know where we are. Um, can you do the drum routine of going your own way and make it go your own way from Fleetwood Mac and make it
Yeah, that's
sound
what
good? I've watched a guy do a cover of it, and until you watch a guitarist or a drummer do it, you don't realize just how difficult that is as as a musical piece of a piece of music.
Yeah, it's not an easy song. No, it's not.
No,
I
it's
can't
not.
say that
It's
I have personally played it myself, but I'm well aware of that song and the phrasing throughout. No, it's not a easy song for certain. Maybe for you, I think maybe I'll pull that out and give it a ring and see how I do. Very cool.
So,
Well,
knowing where you're at your skill level, that's an important part of our knowledge of, well, what do I need to do to get better? Well, if you don't know where you are to start with, how do you know what to do to get better?
well, and Claude, I'll just add to that. Yes, that as a qualification itself, the standard is not real difficult, but you can also make it more difficult by, like, again, the scoring zones, you can make the scoring zones smaller, and strive to be
Mhm.
100%, you know, and not to be a
Mhm.
smart aleck. I hope this doesn't sound, and we were going to ask you what your thoughts were on it. One of the things that we thought to do, well, okay, we shot it to standard. Um, let's push it. And Aaron and I, like,
Mhm.
we did it in half the par time. And boy,
Right.
once you did it
Right.
half the par time, then it got spicy,
yeah.
especially at 25
Mhm.
and 50, which that was a lot of fun. Aaron, I think you felt like, oh, yeah, this, it was fun either way. I personally think it's important to go by the standard. And I think you mentioned in your blog, Claude, is that you've brought people up, never shot a rifle at themselves, and bring them up passing it. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, what
Mm-hmm.
are your thoughts on playing around with, target size, par times? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a firm believer that targets in general are too big. And that's why in social space gunfighting, um, I had the main target that people were shooting at was an 11 by 17 piece of paper, which when you put that on a IDPA target or on a B-27, you realize how much bigger the silhouette is than that. But what I did for the class at the very beginning was I held it up against me, and well, you know what? I'm an average size guy. I weigh 170 pounds, 5'10", and it's the same size as my torso. So, when you look at an IDPA target or a B-27, they're huge. And I think that just, if nothing else, learning to shoot at a smaller, it doesn't have to be a B8, but learning to shoot at a smaller target. And one of my colleagues from the intelligence community said, well, learn to shoot at a piece of paper. When you can hit it all the time, then fold it in half and then do the same thing.
Yeah,
And
it's
when you
awesome.
can do that all the time, then fold it into quarters and make yourself learn to do it like that. That's another way of doing it. You reduce your target size. It's actually pretty interesting if you look at the very original silhouette target, which is the B-21 that was originally designed as a Colt Police silhouette target by John Henry Fitzgerald. If you cut one of those out, and I probably should do this and take a picture of it. If you cut one of those out and put it on a B-27 or an IDPA target or a USPSA target, you start to realize just how much smaller the standard were in the old days and how we've gotten kind of complacent about making sure that now granted, America's gotten bigger as people,
Mhm. Yeah,
but
true.
you know my admonition to the class is that if you shoot someone above the diaphragm, you're generally going to get some pretty rapid results. If you shoot them below the diaphragm, it's still can be a very deadly wound, but it's probably not going to have the same result as quickly. Well, above the diaphragm is about a sheet of paper. So that's one of the things that whenever I'm giving somebody private lessons or something like that, I tell them, well, learn to shoot at a piece of paper. And interestingly, in the NRA personal protection courses, that's what the standard is for the add-on exercises for the courts. The takeaway practice afterwards is a sheet of paper, and I think that's pretty good standard.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Claude, because in the background here is one of the new range master targets, and the primary targeting area is just it is almost a square, but it's a rectangle, and it's about the same size. It's slightly smaller than a piece of paper. I just find that real
Mm-hmm.
interesting because I just got this target to practice with, and I found that real interesting that you said that, and I measured it. I was like, okay, this is just slightly less than a piece of paper. Interesting.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and it's one of those things where as time goes by, Claude, I think all of us, I mean, you mentioned IDPA. Aaron and I have been in IDPA for many years. I haven't shot IDPA as much over the last few years, but I think there's a point where, and if Tim Herron's listening out there, absolutely not poo pooing, going fast with the pistol, um, or Mike Seeklander, I know he listens to. I love all that too. There is there is this divergence for me as even just over the last couple of months is I'm almost to the point where I want to get as close to 100% on smaller targets being, slowing down a little more, and getting to where I can do those types of small standards, of course, B8s or even some larger targets as well. But I am more interested in getting really good at those types of standards than I used to be about, gaining the ranks in IDPA. Does that make sense? Am I crazy there or?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm pretty much the same way now. That to me, and I'm like you. I don't shoot IDPA nearly as much as I used to. But when I do, if I don't get a -0, I'm pretty unhappy with myself. That's really the standard that I'm looking for. Is I'm not looking for anything outside of the -0, and whatever sight picture I need to get. And here again, we go back to Brian Hill's discussion about a decision,
Mhm.
and those decisions are split-second decisions. Do I have enough of a sight picture to to make the hit, and can I press the trigger smoothly enough to do that? And making sure that I don't like to think about shooting slower. It's an idea that I got from Bill Rogers, that he says shoot better,
Yeah.
and
Thank you. I
so
like
what
that.
does that mean? Well, that really means make sure that you have a good enough sight picture or index. At close range, you might be only indexing the gun on the target, but make sure that you have that, and then press the trigger smoothly enough to make the shot happen.
Nice. I like that. I wrote that down. Shoot better because we also like enhancing our mental game, and I think that's a better way to think about it. Instead of slow down, shoot better. I like that. And
Excellent.
I'll add to that is that, and I think, and forgive me, I think it was Daryl Bulkey and a couple of the other guys were speaking a little bit more on this about, folks getting to the point where your splits are so short, getting down in the two tenths of a second, trying to get into the teens, and how really at some point you're taking your decision process out of that. You're shooting faster
Hmm.
than you can make a proper decision. And I think there's some bearing on that as well, that although we might be able to shoot those real fast splits, but are we really wanting to try to get our splits up to where we still have enough time to make a decision?
And
Hmm.
outside of the reactionary time gap.
Yep.
Hmm.
Excellently. Yeah, it kind of along the same lines. Well, excellent. Well, Claude, we're getting close to an hour here, buddy, and man, we have covered a lot of awesome subject. I hope that sometime you'd be willing to come back on because we had a couple of subjects that we didn't cover. And I know Aaron has one last question, but man, this has been a lot of fun. Again, hopefully you don't mind coming back on.
I've enjoyed it. I very really appreciate the invite to be on your podcast.
Awesome, buddy. It's been an honor. I mean, it has been. Aaron and I've been doing this show, what, 4 years, Aaron?
Bro, I think it's 5 now.
Yeah, it's okay. So we just hit season 6. That's right. So it's been 5 years, and we probably talked about inviting you on probably the whole time, Claude. So I remember you
Well, we
from the
finally made
TPI
it.
days. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
So, yes, this is well known. And in my opinion, it is the most important question of the show, Claude. And that is, who are your top 3 favorite bands and or musicians?
Okay. Um, in no particular order.
Okay. Answer how
Fleetwood
you
Mac,
like.
AC/DC, and Chicane.
Chicane.
You'll have to
Chicane
refresh
is a
my memory on
trance group.
Chicane.
Yeah, Chicane is a trance group that was very prominent just around, as weird as it sounds to say this, the turn of the century.
Oh, wow.
And I listened to their music very, very regularly. The song Strong in Love, I listen to that almost every day just to keep myself balanced in the current political environment.
I'm going to check that out. I think I did see you mention that on one of your
Yeah, I put it on.
your
It's
Facebook.
on my Facebook page.
Yep, that is where I saw it. I'm going to check that out.
All great answers, all great bands, musicians. On the AC/DC topic, a lot of people would assume some rock guitar players into AC/DC and Malcolm Young for specifically. I never really got into them until recently, and I still don't listen to them much. But there may be 3 rock bands that are as iconic and as important as AC/DC. I mean,
yep,
it just the Malcolm Young's Gibson. Why am I forgetting the model of guitar? I cannot believe that.
I'm gonna have to slap you through the.
I literally have a brain.
Aaron knows everything about guitars.
Okay, his Gibson SG. I am so embarrassed. I think we're gonna have to edit that out, Eric. But yes, his Gibson SG, that outfit that he has, and man, great guitar tone played through. Amazing enough, if you can see that orange amp right there, that is the exact type of amp that Malcolm Young plays through. So yeah, it's a clone of a Marshall JTM 50, and I had no idea he used those until a couple months ago, actually. But excellent. What a fun conversation. This was a delight. We have lots of great and fun guests. Sometimes we get to say that some stick out as a great, just an extra special episode to us, and this was genuinely one of those.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Claude, so thanks for spending your time with us, and we hope to talk to you again soon, and hopefully get to attend one of your classes and or just meet you in person sometimes. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Well, and real quick, Claude, for those in our audience that may not know, and I'm going to put all this in the show notes, by the way, is tell folks how they can reach you, buddy.
thetacticalprofessor.net. That's my blogs, and I post everything there eventually. That if I do anything else, I link it there. So the Tactical Professor, all one word, .net.
Excellent. Yeah. Again, at least this year, Aaron, we've talked about Claude's stuff and posted it on our show notes at least a few times. So, and we've done it throughout the show. So, all right, Claude. Well, listen, you have a blessed evening, and let's do this again, and let's get this class together when you're ready to do it.
Okay.
Sounds excellent, guys.
Living the dream. Born to be alive.
There you go. Awesome.
Take care, guys.